there is a story of a Christian school. And in this school one day, all the children are lined up at the cafeteria for lunch. And so one of the teachers, just to remind them, put a sign up next to all the apples that said, "Take only one, God is watching." At the end of that line, one of the children decided to make his own sign next to the cookies that said, "Take all you want, God is watching the apples." I like the story and I get where he's at, but we have to understand that in his omniscience, that in God knowing everything, that God is watching everything from the apples to the cookies at the end. He's aware of all things and he is sovereignly watching over all of creation, including our very own lives. And I think we'll see that bear out very well today in Scripture we look at. So if you will join me, we'll be in John chapter 5. And we're going to look at the first 18 verses of John chapter 5. So if you have your copy of God's Word, beginning in John chapter 5, verse 1 reads, "After this there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool in Aramaic called Bethesda, which has 5 roofed colonnades. In these lay a multitude of invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man had been an invalid for 38 years. While Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been there a long time, he said to him, 'Do you want to be healed?' The sick man answered him, 'Sir, I have no one to put me in the pool when the water is stirred up, and while I am going, another steps down before me.' Jesus said to him, 'Get up, take your bed and walk.' And at once the man was healed, and he took up his bed and walked. Now that day was the Sabbath, so the Jews said to the man who had been healed, 'It is the Sabbath, and not lawful for you to take up your bed.' But he answered them, 'The man who healed me, the man said to me, take up your bed and walk.' They asked him, 'Who is the man who said to you, take up your bed and walk?' Now the man who had been healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn, as there was a crowd in the place. Afterward Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, 'See, you are well. Sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you.' The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had healed him. And this was why the Jews were persecuting Jesus, because he was doing these things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, 'My Father is working until now, and I am working.' This is why the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him, because not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he's even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God." So after the encounter that Jesus has had, he returns to Jerusalem. He goes back for a feast. We're not given the details of which one it was, but he's back in Jerusalem again, the center of all the religious activity, therefore, for the people, for the Jewish people. And he comes in by the north gate, which is the sheep gate, and you see there a pool that they call Bethesda, which means this a place of outpouring. And in this pool was known to be a pool of healing. And so people would go there, people would near it, what they call there in Aramaic, Bethesda. In this pool, a lot of times the water was more of a red color just because of all the minerals that it had in it. The way it was fed, we're confident it was fed by a spring that comes into it. And there was a belief that people could be healed by this pool, not by the minerals, but even in a greater sense. The belief was that at times the water would get stirred up, it would bubble and it would get agitated, probably by the spring that was feeding it. But there was this idea that got passed along that when the pool was stirred up, it was an angel of God who would come down and the angel was stirring the water up. When the water was stirred, the first person who got into the water, that person would be healed. In fact, some of your copies may have a verse 4 in it that is not in other copies that was later added. That detail I just gave you, that commentary, was added somewhere, but the oldest and most reliable manuscripts we have don't include that. So first we're told here in verse 5 that the man had been an invalid for 38 years. For 38 years he has been completely unable to walk. Just imagine the life that he's had. I mean, just even today it's not the easiest existence, but at this time he has no means to support himself. Somebody is taking him and carrying him down along with his bed and placing him next to this pool in the hopes that someday he could get in the pool and maybe be healed. But this is his life. This is his fate. There's nothing he can do about it. He can't take care of himself. He can't provide for his family. And there's just really nothing for him except just this hope that someday this water, and he and so many other of these invalids, people with diseases and different things would be around this pool, and in this pool would just a glimmer of hope that something would happen to them, that they would somehow get well. And that is the fate of this man. So we know for a long time he has been this sick. So there are a couple of reasons. Certainly, the significance and the depth of his disease. And secondly, everyone around there would have known him and would have been aware of him. That's the guy. He hasn't walked in 38 years. It's a terrible thing, but it's no surprise to anyone. It's just the norm that he lies next to this pool and does it. But it says when Jesus walks in, he sees him lying there, and he knew that he had been there for a long time. And this is kind of the point of it. Jesus hasn't been there with this guy before, and Jesus hadn't had this situation, but before time began, before creation itself, Jesus knew that he would be in Jerusalem at this point. He knew that he would be next to this pool. He knew the man who had been disabled for 38 years would be lying there. Jesus knows. And there's a concept I think we have to be aware of, and that we have to reinforce that God is aware in his omniscience of everything. Very clearly. There's a man who was going out, and he was actually going to go into his neighbor's field and steal corn. And sadly, he takes his young son along with him for this outing that they're on. And he's got a bag along, and he stops and he looks. He looks this way, he looks that way, all around to make sure nobody's coming. Then he tells the son, you stand here and keep watch to make sure nobody sneaks up on us. And as he's about to start picking corn and putting it into his bag, the young son says, hey, Dad, there's one direction you forgot to look. And so Dad kind of panics a little bit. He says, okay, there's somebody coming. Which way did I not look? He says, Dad, you didn't look that way. And of course, the dad is guilt-stricken. He understands that even though no one around him knows what he's doing, and he probably could have gotten away with it, God knows. And it took that child reminding him of that very thing, and so he took his empty bag and he took his child by the hand, and they left from there without the ill-gotten gains that they had planned on getting from it. God knows our situation, whatever it is, wherever it is. Scripture tells us he even knows the number of hairs on your head. He knows our very thoughts, the Bible tells us. There's nothing that escapes his notice. There's nothing beyond his knowledge. And that's a critical piece for us. And of all the people that are lying there, Jesus picks this one out. It is with divine purpose, divine appointment, and with his divine sovereignty that this man is selected. And when Jesus asks him the question, do you want to be healed? Do you want to be healed? It must have seemed like a strange question. Why would I be here? Look at me. My legs don't work. For whatever reason I'm broken. I'm spending all day lying next to this pool in just the hopes that something would happen. Of course, I want to be healed. What kind of a question would that be? But look at the man's response. I mean, it's pretty incredible. In verse 7, he says, I have no one to put me in the pool when the water stirred up while I'm going down, and another one steps before me. The Savior of the world stands there and says, do you want to be healed? His response is to complain about it. I'm sick, I'm broken, there's nothing I can do about it. I try to get in the water, I can't get in the water. No one will put me in. I try to get in, but somebody else beats me down, and when the water is stirred up, it's no hope for me. His response to the question of Jesus is to complain about it. How often do we get in places of despair, in need of healing, that God offers, and yet our response is to complain? Yeah, but God, my situation is different, or the people don't treat me fairly, or this is just not right, or things just shouldn't be this way, God. And we complain instead of looking to the one who can provide us the healing that we need. And Jesus speaks. Jesus speaks as he spoke at the beginning of all creation, when the heavens and the earth and everything else that exists were spoken into existence. And he tells him with these same words, get up, take your bed, and walk. For 38 years, this man hasn't used his legs. For 38 years, the reality of his life has been one of helplessness and hopelessness. And in essence, he tells him, get up, take the bed you've got, and walk. And it's an interesting thing. Jesus doesn't just say, be healed. If you think back to Canaan when he had the water in those 6 jugs, right? He doesn't say, water become wine. He says, just take some of that water to the guy in charge. And it was wine. When he meets the official with the son who is dying, he doesn't say, your son is healed. He says, go home, your son's going to live. And the same thing with this, and all he says to him, he says, hey, get up, get your bed, and walk. It is that healing power, it is the command. It's not some magical thing. It's not some trick. It is the power of God understanding this man's needs and what he truly desired, and to be well. And at that very instant, it's not a gradual thing. It's not something that comes along one time. Miraculously, this guy is healed. His legs are strong again. His legs work again. He hops up, and he does exactly what Jesus tells him to do. He grabs his bed, he throws it over his shoulder, and he takes off. What a beautiful thing. Can you imagine the excitement? This guy's headed home. He's got to be, at least in my mind anyway, he's headed home. He's going to tell his family, probably the ones that even carry him down there every day, I can walk again. I can get a job. I can support myself. I can support my family. I can do, my life has changed forever. Because of Christ's healing, because Christ understood, because Christ knew who he was. It's unimaginable to see this and to even understand the emotion that this guy is going through now, the excitement and joy he must feel that he can walk again after having not been able to for so long. Carl Linnaeus, understanding the omniscience of God, this guy is a physician, he's a zoologist, he's a biologist, he's incredibly intelligent. And he would fill lecture halls with people. And above the hall, above the door, he would always have these words, and they're in Latin, which I'm not going to attempt, but it says, live innocently. God is present. Live innocently. God is present. And it was be careful what you say, be careful what you do, be careful where you look, because God is there. And he wanted that reality to come to his students, and it's a reality that you and I must understand as well. No matter where we are, no matter what we do, no matter what we think, God knows. Because he is God. Anything less, he wouldn't be God anymore. It's an incredible thing. Now, what's incredible about this as we go on is that this happens on the Sabbath. Okay, so it is the day that God had designed from the very beginning. He created 6 days. He ceased from his work on the 7th day as an example to us, as a model to us of how to live our lives. The 6 days of working and then a day of rest. And in this, happening on the Sabbath in Jesus, this is no accident. It happens exactly when and how Jesus intended it to happen, because Jesus knows. And this guy, as he's excited, he's going to be walking a foot off the ground, I think. And he's headed home, and he's carrying this bed that has carried him for so long. And he runs into what it calls the Jews. Now, the wording behind this is Jewish religious leaders. And they say to the man that's been healed, it is the Sabbath, and it's not lawful for you to take up your bed. This is amazing to me. That guy hasn't walked in 38 years. Today he's walking for some strange reason, and you're worried about that he's carrying a bed? That's the best you can come up with? That's your chief concern? That's your priority? He's like, what is wrong with you? What are you doing? Why are you carrying a bed? Do you not understand this is a Sabbath? You must be crazy. You can't carry your bed on the Sabbath, and oh, by the way, you can walk. You're missing the entire thing. But you see, when Scripture tells us to remember the Sabbath and keep it holy, the implication there was a ceasing from work. But it doesn't define what work means. Now, the customary approach to it is your everyday job ceases on that Sabbath. But the Jewish leaders several centuries before this had decided, maybe we need to define what work really is. And so they created 39, or what they call 40 minus 1, definitions of what work is, and you can do this, but you can't do that. This is okay, that's not okay. You can get here, but you can't go there. And they put all these rules in place around it, and one of them was you can't carry anything from one domain to another, which is what he was doing. Is he breaking the Sabbath? No. Is he breaking their rules about the Sabbath? Yes. And in the midst of all this craziness of a man who hasn't walked in 38 years is suddenly walking, and you're concerned about that he's breaking your rules. You're missing the big picture here. You really are. I mean, it's glaring you in the face, and you simply cannot see it. There's a story of when Reggie Jackson played baseball. Reggie Jackson, incredible baseball player, really had great speed. And as the story goes, the manager of the Orioles at the time had a strict rule. If you don't get the steal sign, you don't steal a base. And Reggie seemed to kind of resent that because he knew how fast he was, and he was confident that he knew the pitchers and he knew the catchers and he knew who he could steal on. And so one game, he's on first base, and he doesn't get the steal sign, but he's like, you know what? I can take this guy. And so from the windup, Reggie gets a great jump on him. He gets all the way down to second base, slides in. The throw is not even close. He feels vindicated. I knew it. I knew I could get the jump on this guy. I knew I could steal the base on him, even though I didn't get the sign. Well, after the inning was over, the manager calls him aside and says, listen, here's what you don't get. I know who you can steal on. I'm aware of that. I didn't give you the steal sign for a reason. Because after you is our next big hitter. And because you stole, they intentionally walked him. The guy after him has been struggling against this pitcher, so I had to pull a pinch hitter up to try to get you two off the bases and home again, which left me short on the bench later in the game. See, Reggie had been thinking about himself and what was best for him and what was most important for him, but he didn't see the big picture that the manager could see. So very often in this world, when you and I get wound up and we're looking for what's best for us and we don't understand things that's going on in the world, we're concerned about us. Don't understand why hurricanes hit the coast and destroy and take life. But God knows, because God sees the big picture. Don't know why one life is taken and one is left, why one's healthy and one is sick, why one is rich and one is poor. But God sees the big picture, and he knows. And we love to plan our lives out. We've got our calendars and hour by hour and day by day. And folks, we don't know what's going to happen in the next minute. But God sees all of eternity. He sees everything. So sometimes when things don't make sense, we have to understand it all makes sense to God because he's in control of it. And from our limited perspective, maybe things just don't look right. But to God, everything is just as it should be. The guy's been disabled for nearly 4 years, and they're worried about a bed. No doubt. There's no doubt that Jesus set this up just the way it was. That's why he told him at that point, get up, take your bed, and walk, because he knew they would meet these two Jewish leaders on his way. He knew the encounter was going to happen, and he knew where their hearts were because he simply knows. The guy says, I don't know. I don't know. He says, there was just this guy. He healed me. They missed that part. And he said, get up, take your bed, and walk. And so I don't know. It's hard to say. Is he blaming Jesus here, or is he giving him credit for it? But what the issue was, that after he healed him and all the excitement, Jesus basically just kind of faded away into the crowd because it's not the kind of attention that Jesus was looking for. He wasn't there as a magician or a trickster or some just healer, but to prove out a point here that he's aware of all things, even the sinfulness in our lives. He is aware of it all. So the Jews want to know, well, who was this man? He simply can't tell him because they're like, you tell us who he is, we'll go fix this situation. We're going to straighten him out. You don't tell people to carry their beds around on the Sabbath. That's breaking our rules. And so they continue on with this scenario here. Afterward, Jesus finds him in the temple, And Jesus celebrates with him. Look what it, see, you are well. How great is that? And Jesus is joining in with this guy's, his joy over being able to walk, and his life has been changed forever. And Jesus says, look, it's a great thing. You can walk again. But then he goes on. Sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you. Hebrew tells us to throw off sin. It is a weight that clings to us that we can run the race. And Galatians chapter 6 says, do not be shocked by this. God is not mocked. God is not surprised. He will not be fooled. What you sow, you will reap. What you plant, you will grow. If you plant sin, you will grow the consequences of sin. If you grow righteousness, then you will reap the benefits of righteousness. But that is the reality of it. What you sow, you will reap. Now, he's not making a connection that every sin leads to a disease, but something this man had done had caused his incapacitation, his disability. Not every one of them does right now. Not every sin has an immediate consequence. Every sin has an eternal consequence. So just because we got away with it today doesn't mean we're going to get away with it forever. At some point, every sin will be held accountable for, either in Jesus Christ or because of our own doing. But every sin, even though it doesn't have an immediate consequence, will at some point bring the pain that sin brings to us. So this man now knows it was Jesus that healed him. And he seems to go look out and seek for these guys, these Jewish leaders, said, hey, I found out who it is. It was Jesus. He's the one that healed me. And so you can almost hear it. Oh, it's that Jesus guy again. We should have known. And so it seems as though they have found Jesus. They go looking for him. And they accuse him of breaking the Sabbath. They accuse him of breaking their laws, and for this, they persecuted him. They persecuted him. They put him down. Certainly, they called him names. They tried to dissuade people from following him because he was breaking their laws, the laws that they used to control the people. And in this, as they tell him, you've got to stop doing this. You can't be telling people to carry things on the Sabbath like this because it's not okay with us. And Jesus makes the point very clear. As he said in Mark chapter 2, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. You guys have got your priorities out of whack. You're missing the big picture here. You simply don't understand what's going on or who it is that you're talking to. You're so wound up in your traditions. You're so caught up in how things have always been and how you want them to be that we miss the real thing. And you know, the church today has to deal with that as well. We get caught up with things and how they've always been and the traditions that have always been in place and how we just want them to be and how we're comfortable with. And we miss how God is working within our midst. God is doing things. God is changing lives, and God is making things happen, and we're worried about whether or not things have always been the way they always have been. And don't let things change, and don't get out ahead of ourselves. And then we miss God's movement all around us because we miss the big picture, because we're worried about me and what I want and what I'm comfortable with. Their laws kept them in control, but Jesus says something that's just absolutely out of this world. My Father is working until now, and I am working. He says a couple of things here. First, he refers to God as his Father, which he's saying that he is God. By claiming God as his Father, he's saying he is God, which is like, whoa, that's just way out of here. Secondly, he talks about God and the work that God is doing. Now, we've seen this where we know very clearly that on the first 6 days of creation, God worked and made everything that's ever been made. On the seventh day, God ceased, or we would call rested. And we know God wasn't tired because he's also omnipotent as well as he is omniscient. He doesn't get tired. But even on the Sabbath day, God worked. How do we know this? Because if for one moment, one brief second, if God were to take his hand off of creation, in his work of sustaining and maintaining creation, it would simply fly apart. It would simply cease to exist. So even on the very first Sabbath, God was still working to sustain what he had created. And Jesus says, God has always worked. I am working. He's not denying the Sabbath. He's simply explaining to him who he is and what God is doing and how their priorities are so far out of whack. He created the Sabbath so he gets to decide what's right on it. He's not taking away the rest. He's simply explaining the bigger picture here. To show how deep-seated their resentment is, how hardcore their traditions were ingrained in them, how bent they are on making sure that people are following their rules. In verse 18, this is why they wanted to kill him. He made himself to be equal with God. He made himself to be God. He healed a man who had been sick for 38 years. He healed a boy. He turns water to wine. On and on and on the miracles come. And what do the Jewish leaders want? He has to die for that. How does that even make sense? Because you don't understand the bigger picture here. God knows everything. And just because you've got your rules and your tradition and your ways, it doesn't mean that God's ways aren't better. And when God calls them to account on this, and he calls them out, they simply want him to die. Who could heal people? Who could change water to wine? Who could feed thousands of people but God? And yet they discount all the things that God is doing for them in an attempt to maintain the status quo. They missed what was really happening. And they didn't understand that God understood even what was in their hearts. So even the things that we think nobody knows, the things that are done behind closed doors, God knows. The things that we see that we shouldn't see, God sees them too. The thoughts in our head that nobody but me is aware of, God is aware of. Because God knows all of it. There's nothing that escapes his notice or his knowledge. He is above it all, and so he is for all. Now, this may seem a little bit strange to you. It's like, okay, everywhere I go, God is looking at me. Everything that I do, God knows about it. Everything I think, God is aware of it. And it's kind of like this 21st century idea of public surveillance, right? We get a little creeped out about it because your telephone is tracking you, your search engine is tracking you, your GPS is tracking you, your social media tracks you. There are cameras seemingly everywhere. They're tracking everything we do, and there's just this friction, this real tension between what is keeping us safe versus what is actually privacy, and what do I get to keep to myself. And so it makes it kind of creepy because we know that there are people who would take this information and use it for evil, right? We're aware of that there are people who take all this information, the surveillance that they get from us, and they can claim good, but we know it's used for evil. So how is it that God's any different if he's watching and aware of everything that I do? Here's the difference. First, of course, God would never use it for evil. But God's viewpoint is that of a loving father. I mean, which of us is a loving father or even a loving mother? We keep watch over our children. That's not a creepy thing. We do it because we love them, because we care for them, because we want the best for them. We prevent them from doing dangerous things, from hanging out with the wrong people, from getting involved in things that had no business that would tear them apart or harm them. It's based upon love. When God is watching us, when God is aware of everything that we're doing, when God is keeping track of that, it's based upon his love for us. Not because he's some overbearing, want to keep us under his thumb kind of thing. But it's simply out of our best interest. Do you realize this morning that God is aware of everything in your life? Are you aware that nothing misses his notice? Are you aware that even the secret things are not secrets to God? And are you tired of fighting against it and trying to hide it? Do you want to be healed, as he asked the man sitting next to the pool? This morning, do you want to deal with God and have him take away those things that you think nobody else knows about but that he knows about? And once for all, get them out in the open with God and do what's right and deal with them once and for all? Do you want to be healed?